The Tale of Two Fathers, A Journey to Wealth and Freedom. Chapter 1. Two Fathers, Two Worlds. In the tropical paradise of Hawaii, a young boy named Robert Kiyosaki was growing up between two very different worlds. One world was led by his real father, whom he called Poor Dad. Poor Dad was a highly educated man, a professor, a government employee, a man who had dedicated his life to learning and teaching. He had a PhD and believed in the power of education and job security. He often told Robert, "Son, if you want to be successful, study hard, get good grades, and find a high-paying job with good benefits. Work your way up the ladder, save money, and when you retire, you'll be secure." Poor Dad was respected in the community, but there was one problem. Despite his high level of education, he always struggled financially. He had a steady paycheck, yet he was always worried about paying bills. Whenever he got a raise, his expenses grew along with it. A bigger house, a nicer car, more debt. On the other side of town was Rich Dad, the father of Robert's best friend, Mike. Unlike Poor Dad, Rich Dad never finished school. He had no college degree and no high-paying job. Instead, he was a businessman. He owned multiple restaurants, stores, and rental properties. Unlike Poor Dad, Rich Dad never seemed worried about money. Instead, he lived a life of freedom and control. He often told Robert, "If you want to be rich, you must learn how money works. Don't work for money, make money work for you." Robert found himself caught between these two worlds, one teaching him to play it safe, the other encouraging him to take control of his financial destiny. Confused, Robert decided to learn from both fathers and see which path led to true wealth and security. Chapter 2. The first lesson: work for knowledge, not money. One day, Robert and his best friend, Mike, went to Rich Dad and asked, "Can you teach us how to be rich?" Rich Dad smiled and replied, "I can teach you, but only if you're willing to learn, not like you do in school, but by experiencing the real world." Eager to start, the boys agreed. Rich Dad put them to work in one of his small grocery stores. Their job was to sweep the floor, stock shelves, and clean up. But there was a catch. He paid them just 10 cents an hour. At first, the boys were excited. But after a few weeks, Robert became frustrated. "This isn't fair. We work so hard, but we make so little." Rich Dad chuckled and said, Now you sound like most people. They get a paycheck, complain about how little they make, but go back to work anyway. Tell me, do you want to learn how to be rich, or do you just want a higher paycheck?" Robert thought for a moment. He realized that even if he made more money, he would still be dependent on a paycheck. "I want to learn," he said. Rich Dad smiled. "Good. Then let me show you how the rich think differently. The trap most people fall into." One afternoon, Rich Dad took Robert to a park near the city. He pointed at the people rushing in and out of office buildings. Most of them wake up early, go to work, and come home tired. They get a paycheck, pay their bills, and wait for the next paycheck. They do this every month for 40 years. Robert frowned. "That sounds exhausting." Rich Dad nodded. "It's called the rat race. People think more money will solve their problems, but it doesn't. Every time they make more, they spend more. A bigger house, a nicer car, more debt. They never truly escape." Then he looked at Robert and said something that changed his life. "The rich don't work for money. They make money work for them." Robert had always thought that a bigger salary meant a better life. But he was beginning to see that even people with big salaries were stuck in the same cycle of debt and expenses. He wanted out. Chapter 4. The secret of the wealthy: assets versus liabilities. Rich Dad took out a piece of paper and drew two columns. On the left he wrote, assets. On the right he wrote, liabilities. Then he explained, an asset is something that puts money into your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. He gave examples. Assets: what the rich buy. White heavy checkmark rental properties. White heavy checkmark stocks that pay dividends. White heavy checkmark businesses that generate income. White heavy checkmark intellectual property, books, patents. Liabilities: what the poor and middle class buy thinking they are assets. Crossmark a big house with a mortgage. Crossmark a new car that loses value. Crossmark credit card debt. Crossmark expensive vacations. Robert suddenly realized something shocking. His poor dad always said that his house was his biggest asset, but in reality he was spending his life paying off a mortgage. Meanwhile, rich dad owned rental properties that paid him money every month. Poor people work for money. Rich people let money work for them. Robert had never thought about money this way. Chapter 5. The Fear That Controls People. Rich Dad then explains something even deeper. Most people are controlled by two emotions, fear and greed. Fear makes them work for money, and greed makes them spend it all. Then they have to work even harder. It's a cycle that never ends. Robert thought about his poor dad. He was afraid of being broke, so he worked harder. When he got paid, greed made him buy a bigger house or a new car. Then he had to keep working harder to pay for everything. It was a trap. The moment you let money control your emotions, you become its slave, Rich Dad said. But if you learn to control money, you become its master. Chapter 6. The Path to Wealth, Building Passive Income. Rich Dad then gave Robert 4 golden rules to escape the rat race. Invest in financial education. Learn how money works, not just how to earn it. Buy assets, not liabilities. Invest in income-generating things, not things that drain money. Create passive income. Earn money even while you sleep through investments. Think like an entrepreneur. The rich look for opportunities, not just salaries. Robert took these lessons to heart. Years later, he became a real estate investor, business owner, and millionaire, not by working harder, but by thinking differently. He shared these lessons in his book Rich Dad Poor Dad, helping millions escape the rat race. Final thought: are you ready to change? If you were in Robert's shoes, which father's advice would you follow? Would you keep working for money, or would you start building assets that work for you? Your financial future starts with the choices you make today. Rocket Money Bag.